This program is provided by Universal Genesis.
Okay, when I say communism, you probably think of one name, right? Karl Marx. But what if I told you about the other guy, the wealthy factory owner, the fox-hunting gentleman who literally co-wrote the Communist Manifesto? Yeah, this is the story of Friedrich Engels. And the real mystery here isn't just who he was, it's how he could be two completely different people at the exact same time.
I mean, just look at this. This is the whole contradiction of Friedrich Engels laid bare. On one side, you have this man of total privilege, a factory owner enjoying his fox hunts and fine wine, and on the other, a radical revolutionary, a guy who literally fought on the barricades and called for the complete overthrow of his own class. So how does one person live in these two completely opposite worlds? Well, the answer really begins with his pretty unusual upbringing.
So right from the get-go, Engels is being pulled in two totally different directions. You've got his dad, a successful factory owner who's grooming him for life in the family business. But then there's the state, which demands he do his military service. So boom, he's suddenly thrown into this world of discipline and strategy in a Prussian artillery unit. You have business on one side, military on the other, and both of these paths were about to crash together in one place, the smoky, industrial heart of Manchester.
And here's the thing. For Engels, military service wasn't just some chore he had to get through. It became an obsession. He was absolutely devouring books on military history, studying every detail of the Napoleonic Wars. He wasn't just learning how to fire a cannon, He was learning how entire armies were organized, how strategies were dreamed up, and most importantly, how battles were won. This was not a hobby. This was the self-education of a future revolutionary strategist. And people noticed this expertise, for sure. His socialist buddies would later give him a nickname, and it stuck with him for life: the General. It was honestly the perfect name for him. Here was a guy who didn't just think in terms of abstract ideas. He thought in terms of campaigns, logistics, and how to actually win. Manchester, this was the place where everything changed for him. I mean, think about it. By day, he's a manager in his family's business. He's directly benefiting from all the insane wealth being generated. But then, the second he steps outside those factory walls, he sees the other side of the coin, the brutal, grinding poverty of the very workers whose labor made all that wealth possible. He wasn't just reading about the class struggle in some book, he was literally living it from both sides at the same time. And he wasn't just some passive observer either. His guide into this hidden world was a young Irish worker named Mary Burns, who would become his partner for life. And she didn't just tell him about the struggle, she showed him. She literally took him through the darkest slumps, the Irish immigrant districts, places he would never have seen from his manager's office. She showed him a reality of suffering, but also of resistance that was completely invisible to his class. She, more than anyone, put a human face on all his political ideas. Okay, so Engels has this firsthand, boots-on-the-ground knowledge of capitalism's dark side. You'd think his first encounter with the famous radical editor, Karl Marx, would be this legendary meeting of the minds, right? It all goes down in Cologne in 1842. Engels walks into the office of a newspaper that Marx is editing. You can almost hear the history books being written. Or, well, you'd think so.
Yeah, no. It was a total dud, a complete non-event. Marx was super suspicious of him. He basically saw Engels as just another rich kid, an idealistic intellectual slumming it, with zero real-world experience. The whole meeting was cold, it was brief, and it was completely forgettable. The greatest partnership in revolutionary history was seemingly dead on arrival. But then, 2 years later, they meet again, this time in a Parisian cafe. And everything is different. Because Engels is different. He isn't just some intellectual dabbling in radical ideas anymore. No, this is a man who has now managed a factory, who has walked the slums with Mary Burns, who has documented the brutal, real-world conditions of the working class. And this time, Marx actually listened. And man, did it click. For 10 solid days, they just talked, nonstop, debating, arguing, just hashing it all out. And they had this incredible realization. Their independent thinking had led them to the exact same conclusions about everything: economics, history, revolution. It was the beginning of one of the most consequential partnerships in all of history. And they didn't waste any time. They immediately put this new alliance into action. Step 1, 1848. They published the Communist Manifesto. But remember, Engels is the general, and he wasn't just going to sit around and write. So, step 2, 1849, he actually takes up arms and commands troops in a real revolutionary uprising in Germany. Now, the rebellion was crushed.
So, step 3, Marx flees to London, and Engels, who is now a wanted man, has to escape to Switzerland. So, the revolution is over. It's been crushed. And this is where Engels makes a decision that is just stunning, a decision that would define the next 20 years of his life. He goes back to Manchester, and he re-enters the family business, a life he absolutely hated, calling it this dog's life of commerce. And he did it for one single reason, to be the financial lifeline for Karl Marx. And believe me, Marx desperately needed that help. He was living in poverty in London, just drowning in research for his massive, huge book, Das Kapital. And the work was really taking its toll. At one point, he writes to Engels in this moment of just pure frustration, saying, "I am so sick of this economics crap." I mean, his health was failing. He had creditors knocking at the door. The whole project just seemed endless. And you have to understand, the entire intellectual foundation of their movement was at risk of just disappearing. He even confessed to Engels in one letter, "I might die before I finish this book." So for the next 2 decades, 20 years, Engels worked the job he hated, just sending Marx a steady stream of money to keep him and his family afloat. But his sacrifice went way beyond just money. When Marx allegedly fathered a child with their housekeeper, it was Engels who publicly claimed to be the father. He did it to protect his friend from a scandal that would have completely destroyed his credibility. And then, finally, after all that, in 1867, the first volume of Das Kapital is published, and Marx's message to his friend was simple. It was direct. He said, "This book is finished thanks to you." That 20-year sacrifice, it had finally paid off. But Engels' mission wasn't over, not by a long shot. When Marx died in 1883, he left behind a mountain of chaotic, almost unreadable notes for the rest of his masterpiece. So what does Engels do? For the next 10 years, he painstakingly deciphers, organizes, and edits all this material. And he's the one who publishes volumes 2 and 3 at Das Kapital. Let's be really clear about this. Without him, Marx's life's work would have died right there with him. So you have to ask, why? Why this incredible decades-long sacrifice? The answer really comes down to this core idea they had, scientific socialism. See, for Engels and Marx, communism wasn't just, a nice moral idea. To them, it was a historical inevitability, something that could be proven with scientific rigor, like a law of physics. And for any science to be taken seriously, well, it needs its foundational text. And this is where the general comes back in. For Engels, the strategist, Das Kapital was never just some book of philosophy. It was a weapon. It was the theoretical arsenal that the entire socialist movement needed to understand its enemy and to arm itself for the big fight ahead. Okay, so let's put ourselves in his shoes. The movement desperately needs this scientific proof, this ultimate weapon, but the guy who's supposed to be building it is broke, he's sick, and he's on the verge of giving up. So if you're the strategist, if you're the general, what's your move? What do you do?
Well, you do whatever it takes to make sure that weapon gets built. You go work the job you hate, you pay all the bills, you protect the author's reputation no matter the cost. And then you finish the work yourself after he's gone. And this leads us to a really radical conclusion when you think about it. Das Kapital wasn't just the book that Marx wrote. It was the book that Engels, the strategist, willed into existence.
So all of this leaves us with one last pretty provocative question. We all know the name Karl Marx, right? But when you really consider the 20-year sacrifice, the military-style strategic vision, and the sheer force of will it took to get this project over the finish line, you just have to ask yourself, who was the true architect of Marxism?
This program is provided by Universal Genesis.